Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome each one of you to today's exclusive online workshop on forensics for corporate sector and insight. On behalf of WinBuilt, Bridgie Academy, Genta Recruit, and First Job Human Capital and the BIRC, Bridging Industry and Resources for Corporation Initiative, I extend a very warm welcome to all our participants from industry, corporate, financial institutions, legal fraternity, academia, and aspiring professionals. As rightly said by Warren Buffett, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and just 5 minutes to collapse it. With that, in today's digital economy, organizations are not just judged merely by profitability, they are evaluated by their governance, ethical practices, compliance culture, and ability to prevent fraud before it occurs. Today's session is therefore both timely and extremely relevant. Before we begin our technical session, it is my privilege to invite our inspiring industry leader whose vision continues to build meaningful collaborations between industry, academia, and professionals. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Murli Kasinath, CEO for Job Human Capital, Genta Recruit, WinBuilt, and Bridgeview Academy to deliver the welcome address and set the tone for today's knowledge sharing session. Sir, over to you, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to today's workshop, Forensic for Corporate Sector and Insight. As you all know, today organizations operate in an increasingly complex environment where governance, compliance, and cybersecurity, even ethical leadership and risk management are no longer optional. They are today is an imperative. At First Job Human Capital and Bridgeview Academy, our commitment extends beyond the conventional training. Through our flagship initiative, you are all the part of this bridging industries and resource for cooperation. We strive to connect industry experts, academic institutions, government agencies, corporate organizations, and professionals on common platform for continuous learning and practical knowledge exchange. Past 2 years, we are running this platform in a greater success because of all of your cooperation and support. It is a noble platform which was been initiated by all of the participants, the speaker, the current speaker, the previous speaker, who together is supporting us to take forward this mission. BIRC is designed to bridge the gap between theory and practical by bringing domain experts who can share the real experience, industrial best practice, and the emerging trends that professional can immediately apply in their organization. Today's workshop perfectly reflects the vision. Corporate forensic has become an essential pillar for strengthening governance, protecting organizational assets, ensuring regulatory compliance, and mitigating the fraud risk. I encourage each one of you to actively participate, ask questions, and make the most of this valuable learning opportunity. I also welcome Ms. Nisha Menon, who is the eminent speaker of this workshop, who is also a key resource person of National Judicial Academy. And she is a well-known, well-known forensic advisor towards the nation. Recently, I was also witnessing her speaking in Times Now and Republic TV on a major issue related to various concerns. So, thank Nisha Menon for accepting as the speaker and coming to this workshop. Thank you very much for accepting, and I welcome you also. Like I also thank the person who introduced you to me also on the Bombay when we all met together. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir, for those inspiring words. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker for today's workshop. We are delighted to welcome Ms. Nisha Menon, Director of Square Forensic Advisors and an esteemed key resource person at the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal. Mr. Nisha Menon is a highly respected forensic expert and a consultant with over 2 decades of professional experience in forensic science, corporate investigations, fraud examinations, and expert witness services. Since 2015, she has been associated with National Judicial Academy, where she has trained Honorable Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, district judges, judicial officers, and senior level professionals from India and several neighboring countries, including Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Myanmar, Maldives, and Cambodia. Her expertise spans handwriting and signature examination, fingerprint analysis, digital experience, cyber forensics, corporate fraud investigations, and forensic support in both civil and criminal matters. Has served as an expert witness before several Supreme Courts and judicial forums across India, contributing forensic opinions in numerous landmark cases. Today's session gives us a rare opportunity to learn directly from a practitioner who has been at the forefront of forensic investigations and legal evidence for over 20 years. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Ms. Nisha Menon. Ma'am, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think so I have to lower the device. Just So first of all, very good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for this wonderful introduction. And this is really a noble cause connecting various profile people to different sectors and industries across India. And my humble request to all the participants, I can see that there are around 50 participants. My humble request is, I would really appreciate if you can switch on your cameras and let me see your faces, so that will give me an enthusiasm to connect with you. And from wherever you are logging in, please switch on your cameras. My humble request. Fantastic. I know this would get switched off after 5-10 minutes, doesn't matter, but at least I can get to know the people who have been participating here. A very good afternoon, and this is a wonderful platform here and a good knowledge sharing session. Before we enter into the world of corporate forensic or even forensic per se, I would like to have a quick 1 or 2 participants, if we just can raise their hands and let me know their level of understanding about forensic science, corporate forensic. We'll take it further, but at least what exactly have they understood about forensic science? Do they know? Are they aware about? So that accordingly, we'll take the session slowly, gradually from basics to slightly technical, or we'll take it from level 2. So any of the participant, I'm sure that there might be some students also forensic. I would appreciate if anyone can just speak up and give me a brief understanding about forensic as per their knowledge. Anyone? No one?
Yeah.
So is this a completely new topic to you all?
Yeah. So let me start, like, I could understand, like, if forensic means it is related to criminology or, like investigation related to, my understanding is like that only.
Fine, fair enough. At least some basics have been understood by. So we'll take up those part also, the basic understanding of forensic, because there is a lot of hue and cry about forensic in the media. Forensic team has arrived, forensic has come, forensic has come. Now, what exactly is forensic? We'll just have a look. Without wasting much of a time, I'll just share the presentation and we'll start the presentation. Is everyone able to view it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are talking about forensic for corporate sector and insight. Before starting about the detailed topic today's topic, I would like to have a quick discussion and quick brief about Square Forensic Advisors. We are a premium grade private forensic organization and a laboratory which serve the clients across India and globally. We have international clients also. We have reported case to London court, UAE, Dubai, and Bahrain, and many adjacent countries, apart from the law enforcement agencies here in India. Established in the year 2013, and we are based out of, although we are based out of Mumbai, but we serve all clients across the nation and globally. And we are very much connected with the several law enforcement agencies, because whenever they are stuck in cases, because government labs take a lot of time due to their pendency. So when they have to take the charge sheet forward or the investigation, the quick buy is that they send the cases to us, we investigate, we check and report the cases. Even we have reported cases within less than a time span of 24 hours. So that is our reporting time also. In many of the cases, internal organizations, several corporate clients approach us and take forensic reports and lodge FIRs. And on the basis of our reports, FIRs are lodged and even orders have been passed by various judges and judicial organizations. Towards the right-hand side is the list of the services, and you may take a snapshot. You can take a picture of this slide. You can connect with these following numbers for any type of forensic services or any type of consultation services on forensic aspect also. Now, taking this further, first of all, let us understand what is corporate risk. When we talk about a corporate risk, it is just not financial for an organization. It is much more than financial. There is a reputational loss, there are operational losses, there are legal liabilities which generally happen. And whenever there is a corporate risk or a fraud which happens inside an organization, nowadays it is not very much limited to traditional. When I say traditional, I'm talking about those signature forgeries where people practice, copy, and then go for an instrument fraud, sign the check, sign document, loan applications in a banking sector, insurance claims and all. The level of the fraud remains the same, but the application or the execution of the fraud have increased and the sophistication have increased because of this digital technologies. Earlier, the fraudsters used to practice, copy, and then put their signature. Now, Photoshop, copy from a genuine document, paste onto a document, take a printout, and there you go, produce it. You can even upload the documents. And the other, nowadays, fraud is just not limited to these signature forgeries, emails, digital documentation, mobile fraud, evidence manipulation, WhatsApp, data theft, ransomware, impersonation, iCloud-based, and the major part is AI-based fraud. Now, you just cannot understand and analyze and check that whether you're seeing a real human being or it is a AI-based, whether this is real Nisha Menon sitting and speaking, or it is like an AI generated. You just cannot identify it. And that is the major challenge which is currently there and which will subsequently enter the corporate sector very soon. Although it have started seeping in deeply, people creating fake videos in posh cases, having manipulated audio recordings, and in quite a number of cases, even we have faced challenges in identification due to this AI. Now, talking about, I have been getting a lot of calls from different organizations where they say that they want to conduct an audit, they wanted to do a forensic audit. Now, we have to first of all understand and differentiate between the audit, investigation, and the forensic examination. When we say audit, very simple terminology, I think so the majority of the participants towards today are from the corporate sector. So they audit actually evaluates the controls to prevent the risk. So whether it's a seamless process or not, whether there are vulnerabilities or not, that is a part of audit. Investigation always is a post facto analysis when once an incident happens, whether it's a genuine incident, whether this is a fake incident, to identify that, and what is the gravity of the incidents which have happened. Now, when these type of investigation, there's an internal compliance team, internal investigation team, which plays a major role to identify and put together all the pieces about the incidences, what exactly have happened. Now there is a victim and an accused in these type of cases. It can be a normal corporate fraud also. It can be something related to a person also. It can be sexual assault cases also. It can be post related also. So those type of compliances are taken up now. If at all, if the victim or accused moves to the court of law with whatever incidents have happened, there comes the forensic examination part. Whatever gravity or whatever grievous the incidents have happened, everything will fall flat if there is no evidence. It may be like for example, I'll just relate it to the recent episode of Ketan Agarwal murder case. I think so y'all are updated about Ketan Agarwal murder case? Yes? Can I have a yes or no at least? Yes, you're updated about that. Now, the entire case is very strong and the entire case is purely circumstantial. Nobody have seen her push Ketan Agarwal. Nobody have seen. So all these bits and pieces are circumstantial evidences. And unless and until these circumstantial evidences are strong enough, scientific enough, the judiciary would not be able to punish the accused. And that is exactly what forensic experts does, give independent scientific opinion. And when we are talking about corporate forensic, it is more related to the corporate sector. Now, the incidences, whatever happen, is depend upon the type of the sector they are operating. If it's a banking sector, the type of incidences are different. If it's an insurance sector, it's different. If we go to a normal corporate IT firm, then data theft, and it depends upon the type of industry. And when we talk about the value of corporate forensic or forensic expert, the fourth point is the most important. The other 3 points may be covered in the investigation part, but can the evidence withstand the legal scrutiny? So whatever evidence, for example, there is a fraud which have happened, there is a CCTV footage which is there, which has apparently been recorded. But if that is not preserved, if that is not collected, identified, authenticated properly, chain of custody is not maintained, it is not legally admissible. And then there would be no evidence, the entire case goes for a toss. So this is something very crucial. Now, before we enter into what exactly the technical part, I would first of all make everyone understand what is forensic. So there has been a lot of information floating around into the market that forensic is not a science in itself. Forensic comes from a Latin word forensis, which means open court. And any application of science or technology, when used for court purpose, it is known as forensic. Now, how do I explain that? What are the basic sciences? The basic sciences are biology, physics, chemistry, psychology, engineering, technology, so on and so forth. And each subject have their own set of principles, laws, fundamental things which have been identified. When those principles are used to analyze evidence in any sector, then that becomes that forensic. For example, DNA. Now, DNA falls under the purview of principles of biology. So then if a DNA analysis is done, it comes under the purview of forensic biology. If it's a gunshot wound, ballistics, firearms, then it comes under the principles of physics, that is velocity, angle, direction, how fast it was, make and model of the gun. When we are talking about study of poisons, it may be poisons, drugs, and all these stuff, it comes under chemistry. So forensic. So any basic sciences principle, when used for court purpose, it is known as forensic science. And the most important part is forensic experts are to have a background in science. It is not that any person coming from an arts background cannot be a forensic expert. Any person coming from a commerce background cannot be a forensic expert. They can be an expert only in forensic financial audit. They cannot be an expert of a handwriting or a fingerprint or a DNA. Similarly, computer engineers or people related to computer science and engineers need to have, then those are the experts into digital forensic. It is a very highly specialized field. Like doctors, you cannot, with a fever, you cannot go to an orthopedic doctor, can you? No, you can't. You cannot go to a gynecologist if you have, if someone is suffering from cancer. So it's a very, very specialized field. And when we talk about this corporate forensic, this is a word coined by one of the sectors. So the traditional forensic methodologies, principles, everything remains exactly the same. Now, what is the end user? The end user is the corporate sector. So hence, any forensic investigation which we use for analysis of incidents which happens inside the corporate is termed as corporate forensic. Hence, the word has been coined. Now, broad categorization of forensic, I won't go into the much details of biological evidences because this is not a purview. This is not the forum. We are talking more about corporate forensic, but I'll just give you an understanding about broad categorization, biological evidences and physical evidence. Biological evidence is any evidence which is coming from a living organism. It is human being. There is wildlife forensic also. So blood, semen, vomit, any sample coming, fingerprint, anthropology, postmortem, toxicology, teeth bites, DNA, everything's fall under biological evidences. And these are all part of very, very heinous crimes like sexual assault cases, murder, theft. These type of cases, biological evidences are involved. When we talk about the corporate sector or corporate forensic, it is majorly the question document examination. Question document examination is anything which in dispute. We'll discuss in detail. Chemistry, again, although physical, but not a part of corporate, but yes, forensic chemistry can be a part of FDA's food and drug industry sectors, which do compliances, do testing and checking of food grade materials and all. Ballistic, definitely not a concern of corporate forensic unless and until someone dies with a gunshot wound inside the organization. Psychology, this is one of the aspects. We do a lot of psychological assessment tests. And even polygraph we did for several corporate sector where there have been a theft involved. But the major part, it's number one, it's an investigative tool. The subject the person who is subjected to this particular test has to give consent. You cannot subject a person to any polygraph examination without their own consent. So again, this is very subjective, and this would give, and you would require a highly qualified forensic psychologist to carry forward this forensic psychology. And without a consent, it is really illegal to conduct a polygraph or any type of psychological assessment which is basically falls under the category of forensic psychology. But there are various personality assessment tests like MBTI, 16 personality factors and all those. With a consent, you can execute those to subject, which gives a basic understanding and a personality assessment of a employee. Digital and computer forensic, this is something very in, and the major part of the fraud which happens inside the organization comprises of these digital and computer forensic. Now let's go into the detail of question document examination. Question document, anything which is dispute, any document which is dispute in terms of signature, handwriting, typescript, paper, stamp, computer generated, printer, anything which is there disputed, it falls under the purview of question document examination. Now, if you could just see this first image, the image with a naked eye, you can see BP 120 by 80, but the original figure was BP 170 by 90. So this is a manipulated record. And this is an insurance record. And this is a case which we did for one of the insurance companies. Similarly, you can see the check. I have pulled out a very simple case where you can easily identify the zero which has been added inside. So again, alteration is there. In spite of if you use the same brand pen, same color pen also, but it should not be the same pen. We can easily differentiate the chemical composition of the ink and identify. And this is a non-destructive technology. It is not that we would be destroying the evidence. We would be doing any chemical superimposition or anything on that. That instrument would be untampered. So these are all non-destructive type of techniques. Now, when we talk about obliteration, something very important is written and scribbled in such a way that you cannot view with the naked eye. So that also we can do. We can read what has been written inside this scribble. And this is a technique which we use very commonly to read anonymous letters without even opening the envelope. So without even opening, we can read whatever the letter contains. Now, sequence of stroke. Sequence of stroke is which stroke of pen have been written first or ink has been written first and subsequently which have been superseded. Now that I would directly relate it to one of the case studies we did. This was a case study wherein a client approached me and he said that he had taken some personal loan, not from a bank, from a individual person, and blatantly have signed some few papers and said that it was somewhere around 70 to 80 lakh rupees he had taken, and very confidently had given some blank papers to the other person and said that once I return the money, please return me this as a sort of security. The person returned almost 80% of the total amount, and all of a sudden it came as a surprise that the entire property, his house, have been completely transferred to the name of the lender. Now, this consisted of 4 pages and the matter was under arbitration and litigation, and he was unable to prove because the signature is his. He blatantly said that, yes, I have signed the blank papers, but I never signed the content. It was as a security. This person was supposed to return me back. Now, he was lucky enough in the one of the pages, out of the 4 pages, the 3rd page, there was a superimposition of the ink of the signature and the typescript. There I have highlighted, I have enlarged it. Can you see this? Now here with this technique, we could easily prove that the ink of the pen was first made and it was superseded and juxtaposed by the ink of the toner, and we proved that the signature was done on a blank paper and the document was printed later. He won the case on the basis of one very minute forensic observation which we had given. So this is a basic understanding of sequence of stroke. Now, the major factor is 70 to 80% of the cases of question document examination we get for signatures and handwriting analysis, whether the check has been signed by this particular person, somebody have taken money signing. Now, let's understand why we say that handwriting is very unique. I never say as an expert that handwriting is handwriting, it's a brain writing. Now, the reason behind this is whenever we want to write something or even type something, the first thing which comes into our mind is the thought process. As soon as we have the thought process, then there are neurons which get activated and they communicate, yes, Nisha wants to write something or say something. So once this happens, then the brain commands the neuromuscular system, that is our hand. So hand is our instrument of the brain, and subsequently with a pen, we start writing. So can a brain be copied? No. No brains can be copied. Hence, handwriting cannot be copied. Whatsoever practice you do, there are several characteristic features which a fine-tuned handwriting expert would identify and say that this is a forgery or not. Now, the second very important aspect is one small exercise I would give. I think so it would take half a minute if you have a notepad right in front of you. Just sign 5 times. Your own signature, sign 5 times. Done?
Actually, I supposed to ask the same
Yes.
question.
Yes, please. So now the first signature, is the first signature or any 2 signature for that per se exactly identical? Yes or no?
No.
No, it's not identical. Why?
Yeah.
Because we are human beings. We are not machines to exactly identically sign. So if you find 2 signatures exactly identical, 100% it is a forged signature. And for those type of document, you will never find originals. You will always have photocopies. Copy it from a genuine document, use Photoshop, paste it onto a document, take a printout and submit it wherever you want to submit. And fine-tune fraudsters, what they do is they go and report, lodge an FIR and say that the originals have been lost. You keep on fighting with the photocopies. So always when we analyze photocopies, it has to be with a very fine-tuned eye, with an expert eye per se, if those are identical. Now, there are certain conditions. If there is a copy-pasted document which comes to us with a signature which is identical, and there is only one signature, So in that case, we can never identify that this has been copied from a genuine document and pasted here. If we have two identical signature, we can immediately say that this is a copy pasted signature. It is why, because we are human beings, we have a tendency of natural variation. There has to have natural variation in our handwriting. If the natural variation is missing, it is forgery. And again, the natural variation exceeds a certain scope, it means it's a forgery. So that has to be, it's a very thin line between forgery and natural variation. So I will share a beautiful case with you regarding, no, before that, let me show you the forgery types. The forgery, basically 4 types of forgery. The first one is freehand. A person practices it and then tries to copy and simulate it. The second one is traced one, wherein during 80s and all, there was no Photoshop and computer so much prevalent. So at that time, people used to use tracing papers and carbons and all, and used to trace the signatures. Third is forgery by memory. I have been very frequently seeing a person sign, but I don't have a template right now when I'm forging his signature. So it's memory. I try to recall, like he used to make A like this, B like this, and I do that. And fourth is a person doesn't even know how the other person signs. So, and just randomly signs in their own individual characteristics. Now, fourth is a case in which we can even identify the forger. Otherwise, that is the freehand, trace, copy, pasted, and forged by memory, we can't even identify who the forger is. Authorship cannot be determined. So in forgery type of cases, we can say, yes, the signature is forged, but who has done it? We cannot find that. So that is one thing. Now, this is a case which I wanted to highlight. I'm sure that if there are movie lovers, old movie, retro movie lovers, Sharabi movie of Amitabh Bachchan, you might have seen, and this is Munshi of Sharabi movie. I examined the will of Om Prakash Bakshi, and this was, all these 3 signatures were from 3 different pages of the will. And this was a traced forgery. It was an 80s will, that is 1988 or something like that. And we could easily prove, if you see, these are ruled and square grids, exactly identical placement of each and every signature. We proved this signature to be a trace type of forgery. Now, again, this is a very beautiful case which I did. We did it in 2014, wherein one of a doctor lady approached me and said that I have a 7-page document, but I have not signed it. Signatures are mine, but I have never signed it. And she only had photocopy. And the backstory goes that her brother had requested a gift deed for some income tax benefit purpose. And she, out of her love for her brother, went to the registrar office and signed a 2-page gift deed. She was there at the registrar office and she signed 2-page gift deed. And subsequently, after a month, she asked the brother to give her a copy. But the brother keep on evading and said, okay, I'll send. But eventually what she did is she went to the registrar office and applied for a certified copy of that gift deed. It came as a surprise. It was a deed of release. In Marathi, we term it as Hakk Sod Patra. So it was a deed of release wherein she is releasing 400 crores worth of property to the brother. And all the pages were carrying her signature, and it was a registered document. Can you just believe it was a properly registered document? Don't believe that registered documents are flawless and cannot be forged. I have evaluated so many documents which are properly registered, but yet there were forged signatures. So when I started analyzing, and overall, in this case, the brother even challenged the sister saying that, yes, I have forged your signature. You go and prove. You go and prove. You will not be able to prove that. And she came to me. I proved that page number 1, 3, and 5, 2, 4, and 6 were exactly identical signature. This was the gentleman in the newspaper, Mandar Chokle. He was the ex-cops, ex-DCP's, ACP's son. And he made that lady's life a tough task. Nobody was lodging FIR, nothing. But eventually, based on the report, he was behind the bars. Even the High Court of Mumbai had refused bail to him on the quantity and the quantum of the fraud, what he had done based on the report. So this was a pure case of copy-pasted forgery. Now, the most challenging thing for an expert is disguise handwriting, wherein a person himself forges the signature. I write or I sign in a specific way, but I try to manipulate or modify my own signature. For example, these types of signatures forgery are very, very popular in check fraud cases, wherein I'm forced to give a check, but I don't want it to be cleared. So the bank will return it saying that this is a mismatch. So that is known as self-forgery or disguise. And those are cases which we can easily identify, not easily, yes, identify. Now, clear-cut example, can you identify whether these are the signature of the same person towards the left-hand side or the right-hand side or not? Yes or no? Can you identify whether this has been signed by a same person or not? No. Everyone would say no. But this has been signed by a same person. He has tried to manipulate the signature. He used to sell his plot multiple times to multiple people, enter into an agreement by manipulating his own signature and doing a self-forgery. We identified and we proved that this has been signed by the same person, but he has tried to, and we categorically write in the report that the person has deliberately tried to hide his or attempted to hide his or her handwriting for eventual repudiation. This is exactly what we word it as. Now, going ahead, apart from the handwriting part, a lot of technologies available where we can even identify whether a particular document has been taken from a particular printer or not. Like, for example, there is a 10-page document. One of the pages substituted with some new content as per the beneficiary. Same font, same style, everything same spacing. Yet, if it has been taken from a different printer, we can easily identify and say that there has been a modification or a insertion of this page in this document. So again, that comes under the forgery aspect. These type of cases are very, very common in loan documents, loan type of documents where they are submitting agreement, people sign only on the first and the last page. So the insertion happens in the middle pages. Now, the next step, this is again one of the very interesting cases which we handled. A client approached us. He was one of the partners in an LLP, and he said that there was a meeting which held, and it was a normal casual meeting. And all of a sudden, after a month, he gets a letter saying that he has been removed from the partnership with the consent of the other partners. And this was I have hid the content because it had some very confidential information which I cannot show. So the main part was he downloaded it from the ROC website and said that this is, madam, this is something which have been uploaded. None of the partners were there for the meeting, have ever consented, but yet there were 4 partners whose consent has been uploaded onto the website. He downloaded it and gave it to us through email. And once we selected the text, can you see this copy text part? So it was clear that this was a document which was typed on a computer and directly converted into a PDF without a print. Now, if this is a direct printout or a direct PDF conversion now, then where did the signature appear? Then when we selected the signature, can you see this copy image part? So again, this is a genuine signature which has been copied from a document and then pasted on. And then what the person did is, if you see this last big image, the signature is cropped from below also. So we could easily identify that a Word document was prepared, signature was copied from a genuine document, pasted here, converted into a PDF and uploaded to the ROC website. So this is a pure case of forgery. And after proving this in this report, I even deposed in the court. FIR was lodged against all the other partners on the basis of this report. Now, one more thing I wanted to prove to the court that why I say that this is a direct PDF conversion. Can you say the first name written Harsimran? How neat and clean the edges are. So when a Word file is converted directly to a PDF, it would have very clean edges. On the contrary, the Exhibit A1 is an inkjet printer. So whenever there is a inkjet printer, they have very minute nozzles, which leaves a feathering effect towards the edges. And the B1 is a laser jet printer. So with all these characters, there are several other characteristic features which we analyze. This was just for demonstration purpose. We analyzed and said that now see, since Exhibit X1 is a disputed document director, so there is no use of printer. When there is no use of printer means signatures have been forged and copy pasted. A clear-cut case of forgery we have identified. Now, this is again, I'm proud to announce this case or share this case with me. This is there. I have done several high-profile cases, but many of the matters are sub judice, so I cannot highlight them here in this forum or any common forum for that per se. Now, in this matter, Jia Khan suicide case, very popular case. There were 3 experts involved. One from Rabia Khan's side, that is Jia's mother, who have been claiming that first it's a suicide and then a murder and subsequently what. There was a government examiner which the state have hired, that is have been sent to a government lab. And third, I was the expert who was from Suraj Pancholi's side. I was the only expert who said that the suicide note was not written by a Jia Khan. It was a 7-page suicide note letter, which instead of giving it to the police, she had published it in the media first and then subsequently had given. And that case went on for trial for somewhere around 11 years or something. And eventually this was the order which came. That in the open court, Rabia Khan, mother of Jia Khan, said that this suicide note has been written by me. And the order, this is the excerpt of the order. The circumstances as above create serious suspicion regarding the actual author of the said letter, the judge observed. So whenever there are contradictory terms, and I won't say that when you send it to government lab, it has to be a seamless report. I've seen several reports which have been managed, manipulated, or have not been correctly reported. So I have even stood against the government examiner in several cases and reported the. So this is what I would wanted to share with you. It is some very, very important points. Principle of likes. If you want to compare signature, it has to be with signature, initial with initial, handwriting with handwriting, no vice versa comparison. You cannot compare a signature with a handwriting or a vice versa. Authorship, I think so I've already covered that point. Only in 4th case, that is impersonation, you can identify. Otherwise, you can say this is a 4th signature, but you can never say that who has forged this. Comparison of handwriting of any language, yes, can be done. We have to study the script. We need not learn the language, but basic understanding of the script need to be done. So I've done in Urdu, Orissa, Devanagari, Latin script. These are very common scripts, and even South Indian scripts also. Photocopies of signature analysis, yes, always can be done. There are international standards with, but you have to always take that with a pinch of salt in terms of copy-pasted forgery. Ink and paper comparison, no, it cannot be done on photocopies. Originals are required. You cannot identify a person is a left-handed or a right-handed with a handwriting sample. You can say that the person has written with an accustomed hand and unaccustomed hand. Very important part is graphologist versus forensic handwriting expert. There's a huge difference between these two. Graphologists are fit people for corporate sector. Now, how to differentiate? These are people who identify personality assessment of individual, and we do it specifically for human resources or HR people. Now, how we do it? We are merely not graphologists. We have done an extensive research in terms of me and my entire team. We have taken handwriting samples of a person, approximately 100 samples, compared it with psychological tests like MBTI, Myers-Briggs test, and 16 personality factors, and have corroborated the results. There was an accuracy of 98.7%. So whatever results a graphologist says, it was exactly identical, whether a person is a team worker, a sole worker, leadership skill, marketing skill, financial skill, everything very precisely, very detailed, we can identify. Now, a person when comes for an interview, he will be in the best of the resume, best of the interview. But when a person starts working, it is only then you would come to identify whether a person is skilled enough for that particular job or not. For example, a simple question to any interviewer that are you a fast worker or a slow worker? What do you think the answer would be? Obviously, fast worker. Who would say that I'm a slow worker? But eventually, handwriting analysis would prove that the person is a fast worker or a slow worker or not. When I say slow workers are not poor. their level of perfection is too much. They want to go to an extreme perfection, due to which they don't look at the timeline which has been given to them for that particular work. Now, these are the type of experts who handle these type of cases, which is not for legal purpose at all. It is for corporate sector, corporate hiring. We do a lot of these stuff for top level management, middle level management, lower category people also. And here we have forensic handwriting experts, where we prove forgery, angle, instrument fraud, whatever we have seen in the earlier slides. So a graphologist can never submit a legal report in the court of law. They are not authorized to, they cannot do. I am both. I am a forensic handwriting expert also, apart from other qualification. I'm a graphologist also. We can report cases to the court, and we do an extensive work with various corporate sector for this personality assessment, and we do a good job in terms of a hiring thing. So that is something which I would like to highlight. Determine a very important part is, many bankers come to us like, this check is dated so and so, but it has been signed later or signed like 5 years. Can you just identify whether? No, we cannot identify the age of ink and paper, whether it is 2-day-old, 20-year-old, 5-year-old, 10-year-old. We cannot identify. There is no technique, not only in India, but globally also there is no technique. So very categorically, Madras High Court in Jagdishan versus I.S. Swami, this is a very, very prominent order which is given and referred by majority of the courts, which says that a detailed understanding that please do not waste the laboratory's time by sending these type of assignments to the forensic laboratory. This cannot be done. When techniques come, then definitely it can be referred. But as of now, there are no techniques. So age determination cannot be done. I think so. A brief understanding of question document examination. Everyone have any questions on that? Any questions on question document examinations, or we want to take the questions towards the end?
We
Well,
can
shall we
have-
have it? Yes, Elizabeth.
Okay, we'll have it towards the end. So the next is the major part. I'm not taking the other sectors. The major part is the digital forensic thing. Digital forensic is very in now, very, very important. I think so in majority of the cases, it is 80% digital evidence now. WhatsApp chat, email, letters, communication, everything, you will have a digital trail. So digital forensic, when we talk about digital forensic, there is a hierarchy of digital evidence on the basis of the evidentiary value in the court of law. And it is on the basis of this, we term these evidences strong to moderate to low. And there is a very strong triad which is used in the judicial system. This triad is basically mobile phone data, call detail record, and CCTV footage. And call detail record, again, it has been escalated to CDR and IPDR. That is the IP detail record. These are also very important things. And these three things are very, very commonly used in the court of law, specifically in digital forensic. When we talk about the other hierarchy, mobile phone data, yes, high, call detail record, CCTV footage, computer data storage, computer and data storage, which is there, any manipulation, fraud inside organization has been done, the data has been stored inside. Identification, collection, preservation, chain of custody, and to prove in the court of law, very, very important. Financial digital records, UPI, wallet, bank, and all these details for scams, which is very popularly happening. So these type of records or these type of details are very much important. Social media content and email and cloud data has a very, very low value. I would not even term it as moderate. I would term it as low only, because people are always, in majority of the cases, fake people appear and they make fake profiles. So it is not of very much evidentiary value. Internet is, again, internet logs and network logs are very low, because you are aware about IP logs, dynamic IP, virtual private network, VPNs are used. So nobody, no fraudster as of now would use their original IP in executing a fraud. So this is again of a very low level. Audio recordings are very important, although it have been termed as moderate, but this is not actually moderate. It has a very high value, but it completely depends upon, number one, the availability of the device on which it has been recorded. Number two, the authenticity of the recording, that it is continuous, not tampered, not edited in nature. And third is the transcript. Court doesn't put headphones and hear this entire audio conversation. You have to give a verbatim of this entire audio. And the fourth very important point is speaker voice identification. If a person says, no, this is a mimic voice, this is not my voice, then the other side has to prove that this is the voice of the same person. Hence, this audio recording has to be taken as an admissible evidence. Now, taking it further, digital forensic principles, very, very important principles, highly volatile. You play around with the device. There's a mobile device which is in, and normally nowadays what people do is like they log on to YouTube, go to ChatGPT, download some freeware tools, try to recover data. You do something like that, your entire data is tampered. It is of no value to the court, or not even the expert would touch those type of phones. The first thing we question in terms of a digital evidence is what R&D you have done there. If you have done an R&D, it is of no use to you, nor do not waste your time and budget into getting it forensically examined. So once it is contaminated, it will have a trail. If you have installed anything onto a laptop or a mobile, it will definitely leave a trail. And that is tampering of evidence. It has to be done with a fine-tuned digital forensic expert who have an experience, credential, educational qualification, and who use validated tools, not freeware tools. No use of freeware tools is permissible in forensic. It has to be validated tools, and digital tools are really very expensive. So people always look for some freeware tools. There have been several cases who came to us when we gave them their commercials. They said it's on a higher side. They went to some XYZ expert. They used some freeware tools, went to the court with that report, asked for only one simple question was asked to the expert: which tool did you use? He said it was a freeware tool. The entire report was scrapped, he said, and the entire report was put aside. So validated tools, and there's a list of validated tools which is supposed to be used. Now, the major factor, and I'm sure that 90% of the lawyers also doesn't know about that, how to produce a digital evidence. If there are screenshots, if there are chat logs, if there are WhatsApp chat, text messages, emails, how to produce that? Merely printing an email, taking screenshot and printing it and producing it is no, this cannot be done. This is not acceptable. There is a section, Bharatiya Sakshi Adhiniyam, section 63(4). If people interested in legal, please read this section. There is a part A and part B certificate. I'll show that. Part A, you can see, to be filled by the party. Party means the person who has recorded it. It can be an email also, a person. And for organization purpose, now this has to be filled by the person who is an IT guy who's operating the corporate system, who's operating the procedures of the system. It cannot be the director of the organization, because he's not the person who is managing the server. The person managing the server is some IT head or someone. So he is the person who would fill all these details. And there's a part B certificate saying that whatever has been filled in part A is correct. So that is verified by an expert. So this is how, be it an email, for WhatsApp also, WhatsApp chat or mobile data, the entire data has to be retrieved forensically with the help of forensic tool, filtered based on the evidence. Then along with that, a report need to be produced. When we talk about digital forensic, we have cyber forensic, mobile forensic, audio authentication, speaker voice identification. I'll just quickly give you glimpses about that. Now, mobile forensic, deleted data, a very controversial thing. Can we retrieve the deleted data? Now, deleted data from Android phones can be retrieved based on certain things. Number one, storage capacity. Number two, when was it deleted? Number three is usage of the phone. Now, a simple fundamental thing, there are various sectors inside the mobile, and the data goes and sits there. If somebody deletes it, it doesn't delete it from that sector, it de-index it. Now, it is there inside the mobile, but where it is, nobody knows. It is only the forensic tool which checks the data and retrieves it. Now, retrieval happens if that empty sector is overwritten by new data. You cannot get the retrieval process. You cannot get the retrieved data or deleted data. So there are certain terms and conditions. When these type of cases come to us, we clearly say there is no guarantee, warranty that whatever you have deleted will be retrieved. It's a process. It's like a closed door. Something has been, there are few files inside. We don't know whether your relevant file is there. We have to open it, search for it, read, only then we will know. So exactly similar to mobile forensic, but iPhones, if it is not stored on the iCloud, no backup is taken, we cannot retrieve. Earlier, many of the forensic tools used to retrieve data from mobile phones, but nowadays, Apple has really gone very strong on the security aspect. So retrieving data has really got difficult, but forensic tools are also upgrading themselves to a certain level. Now, I spoke about the authentication process of the audio file. So these are the type of graphs this is known as spectrographic analysis. Any edit, a small edit, you change the volume, there would be an edit, and we can easily identify it with, you can see these colored graphs, and these are known as format values, different format values. We check and we identify whether this audio is authentic or not. So merely giving an audio recording in a pen drive to the court would not solve the purpose. You have to get it authenticated for its continuity. Now, speaker voice identification, it's again a biometric identification that every person's voice is very, very unique. It has to be matched with the control voice. So if a person says my voice is mimicked, so we match it with a sample voice, like we match with a sample signature, exactly like that. We match it and we identify. Now this here, I said that AI has got itself into it. I recently investigated a case from which I could identify that, yes, the voice is tampered. There is a manipulation. The person only has recorded the voice, but we could not identify it through speaker voice identification tools because a very highly sophisticated AI tool was used to record that audio and send it across to the person. So we could not do that. So AI making things tougher for experts also, and these are challenges which are coming up. Video examination, clearing of the picture, CCTV footages in hit and run cases, number plates, and all those things. We do a lot of stuff. This is also one of the process. Evidence workflow, as I said, that very, very important. Identification, collection, preservation, and then producing it to the legal. This, if there is a breakage of chain of custody in any of these, the entire evidence goes for a toss in the court of law. But yes, definitely these things can be handled very carefully inside the organization, or if it is an internal inquiry purpose. But with any lacuna in this entire workflow, we cannot go to the court of law. I think so. I'll skip this. Processes, chain of custody. Common mistakes that destroy digital evidence: using the device before acquisition, screenshots, printouts of chats, email, call record, no use, no hash documentation, data sharing through WhatsApp. Please never store or share data through WhatsApp. For example, there's an authentic audio recording we want to produce as an evidence, and you share it with one of the friends and say that you preserve it, I'm deleting it from my handset. Now that WhatsApp share, in spite of a genuine recording, will always show as an edit, because all these social media, they compress the metadata and technical details of a file for easy transmission. So again, it would show as an edit. Now, I would request to please play this audio. The last part is the legal admissibility. I would directly not go into the corporate sector. I would relate it to one of the happening cases which is happening right now. That is the Ketan Agarwal murder case. And a very apt statement was given during the process of live interview in NDTV. Could you just please play this video?
Madan, can you do it, Madan?
Achha, shall I play it here?
Yeah, if possible, you can do it.
Okay.
Being deemed necessary indicate to you, Nisha, that somewhere things have reached some kind of a dead end, or is it just part of the process?
It's generally like when we are using processes and when there are contradictory statements, and because like now it is known to everyone that confession or any statement given to the police, it cannot be taken up in the court as an evidence. Now it is just a part of investigation, and once these confessions are given, that has to be corroborated with other set of evidences for the prosecution to prove this entire case in the court of law, and
Yeah.
scientific evidence is the best part of the evidence which can be taken further. So that is the legal admissibility. Yeah, that is
deemed necessary, being
so that is the legal admissibility. So whatsoever a person goes and says that I have committed, for example, in Shraddha Walkar murder case also, Aftab said, yes, I have murdered her. I have cut the body into 35 pieces. I have stored it onto the fridge and then have transported it. But these statements are mere statements. He may one day go to the court and say that they have beaten me up, and hence I gave such statement. I'll just share. Hence I gave such statement. Similarly, if I don't know how much you all follow cases and case laws, if you're aware about this Nithari killing, Surendra Kohli, who have killed more than 25 odd children and females and all, he's out of jail. Out of jail, he was there. He was given death sentence in 12 cases. Out of 13 cases, he was given death sentence. And that sentence was not even converted into a life sentence. He was scot-free. He was acquitted from those 12 cases. The 13th case last year also he was acquitted. He's out of jail. Mere statement that the evidences put on record is not sufficient enough to prosecute Surendra Kohli. Why? Surendra Kohli confessed to the crime. Police didn't investigate further, didn't have a scientific backing of all these confession statements. He went to the court and he said, I was subjected to extreme third degree methods and I was forced to confess. And this is how it has happened. So without a scientific evidence, nothing falls into place. Similar are the cases which is very high profile and happening nowadays. You see Ketan Agarwal murder case, you see Twisha Sharma suicide case. If these evidences are not proven scientifically, everybody would at their home scot-free acquitted. I would end this presentation with a very beautiful Supreme Court order which very categorically said that I'm not reading out some important emerging new types of crimes and their level of sophistication. The traditional methods and tools have become outdated. Hence, necessity to strengthen the forensic science for crime detection and constant interaction with the judges, with the scientists, and their knowledge to deal with such scientific evidences to effectively deal with on the basis of criminal cases based on scientific evidence. We are not advocating that in all the cases, scientific evidence is a sure test, but only emphasizing that necessity of promoting scientific evidence also to detect and prove crimes over and above evidences. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. My last slide has two beautiful podcasts. If you are really interested in very high profile cases and how forensic deals with those type of cases, how people get acquitted and even the high profile Sushant Singh Rajput case also have been beautifully explained. If you're interested in these podcasts, these are the links to these two podcasts. You can just take a picture and go and view this podcast. And if you want to reach us out for any type of forensic services, consultation, training, or any purposes, please feel free to contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really a wonderful session. And thanks for the insightful and thought-provoking information. Thank you so much. And we'll open the floor for a Q&A session now.
Yes.
Yeah. Participants can post the question in the chat box, please.
So I have a question to Nisha. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
definitely.
Yeah. So, very basic question, like if I was deleting all my data into my phone, is it possible to retrieve all those data?
Depends upon the type of deletion it is done.
Okay.
Deleted data, yes, can be definitely retrieved using different level, but completely depends upon the storage capacity, what is the storage of the device, how frequently you keep on using that particular device, and how recently have you deleted. You deleted something 3-year-old back and you have been using that phone or any device for that per se, it's very difficult to retrieve it.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I have a question here.
Yeah.
In this increasing, like everybody are into digital now. So as for the organization is concerned, what are the biggest blind spot which an organization need to overlook before
The
fraud actually occurs?
the blind spot is people think that they can do their own set of investigation, and once they do that, the tampering of evidence is lot in digital forensic.
Okay.
The conviction level for digital fraud is 0 right now. 0 means nobody have been convicted.
Okay.
So why? Because these evidences are not preserved properly, not taken up. And there are very smart defense lawyers who prove lacuna in the chain of custody and easily eliminate the accused. So that is
Okay.
one thing. Digital evidence, it is there. Please do not handle it yourself. Have an expert team into place who handles those devices. Otherwise, it would be, for example, people start with an internal. For example, I am right now handling a case of a bank, but
Okay.
I am from the client side. Okay, now
Hmm.
he has been, I think so, dismissed from service on grounds of taking bribe. There is a CCTV footage. He has been given a CCTV footage. The bank has done some internal forensic and the CCTV footage copy was done. Now that footage doesn't have a metadata detail,
Okay.
doesn't have a creation date and time. He would easily go scot-free and easily can rejoin the organization. So
Okay.
they don't know how to take up. And when we start taking these corporate sessions, no, everyone wants it for free.
Okay.
So collection of evidence, identifying collection, preservation, chain of custody is very important. And these are the blind spots. And people take it for a toss, like we can go for freeware tools. And a lot of all these AI tools, no, ChatGPT have done like a lot of negative things also. They think that it can be easily, they can do their, so do not investigate. That is one of the blind spot, I would say. And number 2 is lack of understanding about and nitty-gritties of these areas.
Okay.
That has to be a lot of awareness and knowledge has to be spread across.
Okay. So how do you do that?
Through these type of training sessions only, people who are willing to pay us.
Okay.
And even when I go to National Judicial Academy, I train the topmost judges. So it's
Okay.
not that they don't take training they take training sessions, but again, there is a huge lacuna. They're like oldies, 60s and all. They don't understand technology, how to take up these evidences, pass an order, conclusion. That's a tough task at the judiciary level also.
Okay.
So howsoever smart and expert is to make them understand, see, boss, this is the case. And the scenario is when you give a digital forensic report, no, people don't call you to the court for cross-examination. Why? Because they don't understand what to ask. So
Absolutely.
these things are either set aside or taken up as per the understanding of the judge, because in the end of the judiciary, it is said they are the experts of the experts, higher experts than us. So whatever knowledge they have, but there is now a lot of awareness which is happening. A lot of sessions are being conducted for this digital forensic, because 80% of the cases is coming with so many evidences which have digital evidences.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. And we have some questions in the
Yeah.
chat box.
Why you want to choose the career forensic advisor? Which things more inspired you? See, this is a very, very long story. I don't know. You are Rokia Sami, right? See, I have spent 25 years of my career in this field. I started way back in 2000. What inspired me at that time was a very small serial known as Postmortem. And it was that one series wherein I decided that I would be a forensic expert. And it was a tough task. People didn't even knew F for forensic. So I started from there, and it was a really long journey and very inspiring journey. And this is a passion for me. So next question is, as banking becomes more digital, let us know forensic investigation will continue to be mainly investigative, or will they also play a greater role preventing fraud? Now, preventing fraud has to be done because, see, whenever we talk about corporate forensic and forensic analysis per se, all these are post facto analysis. Based on certain post facto analysis, that would give them an indication like these are the vulnerable areas and now you have to prevent it. So all these things, so forensic plays a role in a sense after a post facto analysis. For example, this case of CCTV footage of this bank only, now they know what they need to do, how they need to preserve an evidence to win a case. So all these things eventually would definitely fall into place once people have awareness about this detail. Which case is more difficult in your overall career, ma'am? Can you tell? Every case is different, and I love solving every case. So you ask me digital fraud, you ask me, I give a lot of consultancy. Yes, there was one case which I would like to highlight, but not of something related to corporate forensic. There was a client advocate from Kerala who approached me in a POXO case. POXO case is sexual assault on minor. And that was a case, the guy was, who was, the accused was 19-year-old and the girl was 16-year-old. Both were very small age. They had a mutual consensual affair carried on for a couple of years, and the girl got impregnated. And what maturity can you expect from a 19-year-old guy? When the girl said that I'm pregnant, he immediately said, I don't know kiska hai, whose it is. So she got offended and they filed a rape case against this guy. He was hardly 19 and everything was consensual. And there were DNA report of the aborted fetus, which had a clear match with this accused. And looking into this entire chain of custody, the procedural lapses and everything, in spite of having a match of 99.9% of a DNA report, I made that report inadmissible in the court of law. So that was a challenge. DNA reports generally don't get inadmissible. So that was a challenge. So there was no proper storage and everything. But there are cases where people plant evidences also. So that was one of the toughest case which I had handled, and that was a tough job for the advocate also, who was cross-examining various type of experts and the investigation officers and doctors who handled this entire case. So that was really fun working on. But still, that person is behind bars. He has got a jail term of 24 years. So definitely he'll go to the superior court and this entire thing might fall flat. What will be the alternate evidence then? CCTV, BCSC nowadays using AI video footage are also tampered. See, that is what, when we produce anything as an evidence in the court, we have to authenticate it. Any AI tool, best of the AI tools you use, we can check and identify that there has been a tampering and manipulation. And if details and these forensics tools are so sophisticated, we can even identify the name of the tool which have been used to manipulate. So the only thing is, you do not produce evidences without authenticating. You have to authenticate it. That is the prime concern in these type of cases. Merely taking a CCTV record, putting part A and part B certificate and placing it as an evidence won't solve the purpose. Please authenticate it. Any other questions? So I think so.
I think we are done with that.
Yeah.
Questions. So, Murali sir, shall I proceed with the closure? Anything?
So
Sir?
the AI
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You can
Yes,
close
sir.
it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. As we come to the close of today's enriching session, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. On behalf of Winbuilt, Bridgie Academy, Jetta Recruit, and Forge of Human Capital, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Nisha Menon for sharing her exceptional expertise and invaluable practical insights into forensics, corporate investigations, and digital evidence. Ms. Menon, your wealth of experience coupled with real world examples has provided us with a deeper appreciation of the importance of governance, ethical leadership, and evidences based on investigation in today's organization. Thank you so much. And a sincere thanks to Mr. Murli Kasinath, sir, CEO of First Job Human Capital, Bridge Academy, for his visionary leadership and for continuously creating impactful learning platforms through BIRC, Bridging Industry and Resources for Cooperation Initiative. I also extend my appreciation to the organizing and the technical support team and every participant who joined us today and contributed through their participation and thoughtful questions. Learning is
Very
most valuable when it is shared, discussed, and applied. Thank you so much. And thank you once again. Stay connected with us for more expert-led workshops
So-
under the BRIC initiative. Thank you so much, sir.
I should also mention a special mention to Nisha. See, this is the very, very tough subject. Since I'm also a
Absolutely.
law graduate, I know how these evidence fabrication, manipulation, being a scientist, being a scientist into this domain. And since he is a passionate person, from the starting to end, she carried a smile with her. That is a special mention to Nisha because I know
Thank you
this is
so
a
much.
very, very difficult subject since she is handling. I should say thank you very much, Nisha.
My sincere
Happy
thanks.
connecting you.
Thank you
Happy
so
connecting
much.
you. We will meet you again.
The topic is so serious, you have to keep on smiling, otherwise people will take it really.
But it was
Go into
well
some
presented.
depression. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was
Thank
really
you.
wonderful connecting with everyone out here, all the participants. I have already shared the contact details and all. Anything in future, please keep in touch. Any information required, I would be more than happy to help everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.